two men built one of the most watched garages on television, and yet by the time the cameras stopped rolling on their partnership, they barely spoke. This is the story of how Aaron Kaufman, the quiet mechanic known as the Bearded Wonder, ended up walking away from Richard Rawlings and the empire they built together at Gas Monkey Garage, and what actually drove the wedge between them long before fans ever noticed the cracks. Back in 2012, during the first season of Fast and Loud, a camera crew caught something that never made it into the highlight reels. Aaron slumped in a half-finished car, tools scattered everywhere, fighting to keep his eyes open after being awake for 38 hours straight. That single moment captured the entire arrangement. Discovery had ordered 12 builds in 24 weeks, a workload most professional shops would need 6 months to complete for just one car, and Richard agreed to the deal before Aaron even knew it existed. Living 45 miles away in Fort Worth meant a commute that ate up 3 hours a day when traffic cooperated, so Aaron often left before 5 in the morning and didn't make it home until well past midnight. Plenty of nights he didn't bother going home at all, choosing instead to sleep in a car at the shop and rinse off with a garden hose while the crew filmed around him. Scott McMillan, a friend going back to their high school days in Crewley, worked alongside him that season and later estimated Aaron had logged somewhere around 1,300 hours in the shop by the 12th week. Richard's total, by that same count, sat closer to 200. When a producer once asked Richard how vital Aaron was to the whole operation, he laughed it off and joked about keeping the man chained to the shop floor. The crew found it funny. Aaron, elbow deep in an engine at the time, did not. None of that hardship showed up in the ratings. The show premiered in June and had become Discovery's top-rated series by August, and audiences couldn't get enough of the contrast between a loud, deal-chasing showman and the soft-spoken builder doing the actual work. What rarely got mentioned was that Richard usually went home once filming wrapped for the day, while Aaron stayed behind finishing what the cameras needed to see. Somehow they hit all 12 builds, a feat no comparable shop had managed before. But the price of that achievement had already been paid in burned-out years, compressed into a handful of brutal months. Aaron came to this world without any formal training, having taught himself by pulling machines apart and figuring out how to put them back together correctly. By 16, he was driving a heavily modified Jeep Cherokee and had earned a local reputation as the kid who could repair anything other people had given up on. His first paying job in the industry came through a Dallas outfit called 4-Wheel Parts, and that's where everything changed in 2004, when Richard walked in looking for help with one of his vehicles. After watching Aaron work an engine for roughly 20 minutes, calm and almost surgical in his movements, Richard offered him a position on the spot. Gas Monkey at that point amounted to little more than a side project Richard ran while selling home healthcare equipment for his actual income, and the shop itself was inconsistent at best. Aaron came in as a junior mechanic, but within a few years was effectively running the daily builds, while Richard handled deals and marketing. Long before television entered the picture, the two of them hauled cars to shows across the country together, with Richard driving the morning stretch before handing off the wheel and cracking a beer while Aaron drove through the night. Richard later called those road trips some of the best memories of his life. Aaron almost never brought them up, a quiet detail that said something about how differently each man experienced the relationship they shared. The show itself only happened because a Discovery executive named Craig Kaufman took a chance on a rough sizzle reel that most of the network expected to flop, and instead it helped ignite an entire wave of car build reality programming. Years afterward, Richard would say something that caught a lot of fans off guard, describing Aaron not as a friend, but strictly as an employee, a relationship that had existed inside the walls of a garage from the time Aaron was 20 until he turned 34. Around 2014, Aaron mentioned to producers that he wanted to shave his beard, expecting a quick conversation and maybe a laugh in response. Instead, they told him flatly that he couldn't. He pushed back the way he always did when told he wasn't allowed to do something with his own body, warning them that if they insisted on a no instead of simply asking, he'd buy a razor at the nearest drugstore and shave it on camera in front of everyone. Producers softened their approach immediately, and Aaron agreed to keep the beard, but something in him shifted that day. The beard had stopped being his and had become branding that belonged to a television show, and increasingly he felt like the person underneath it was becoming an afterthought. That same tension played out in the builds themselves. A 1963 Ford Falcon, loaded with twin turbos for the Pikes Peak hill climb, had given him exactly the kind of complex, demanding project that made him feel like a real craftsman. But the network's appetite shifted afterward toward builds that were smaller, faster, and cheaper. When he later pitched an EcoBoost-powered De Tomaso Pantera, a project that would have needed at least 12 weeks of serious fabrication work, producers rejected it almost on sight as too expensive and too slow for television. Every ambitious idea he floated after that met the same fate, and for a builder considered among the best in the state, the rejection started to feel like wasted talent. Richard, meanwhile, seemed to come alive under exactly the conditions that drained Aaron, thriving on tight deadlines and risky last-minute deals, while Aaron craved precision and time. By 2016, Aaron had stopped pitching anything new at all, simply showing up, building what he was told, and playing his role for the cameras without the enthusiasm that had once been obvious in his early interviews. Late that year, he sat alone in his truck in the Gas Monkey parking lot after another 16-hour shift, engine off, expecting to feel something after a day like that, and instead feeling nothing at all. That emptiness told him more than any argument could have. He began quietly calling contacts about available shop space around Dallas and sketching out business plans late at night, settling eventually on an idea built around classic Ford F-100 trucks from the late 50s through the 70s. Vehicles he loved precisely because they were simple, dependable, and mostly overlooked by major aftermarket companies. Leaving wasn't simple, though, since his contract with Discovery controlled both his schedule and his public image, and his first request to leave Fast and Loud was rejected outright. The network tried offering more money to keep him, but money wasn't the issue. When asked directly what he wanted, his answer was just one word: freedom. Negotiations dragged on for months, during which Richard learned about Aaron's plans secondhand through producers rather than from Aaron himself, though he later admitted he'd known for years that Aaron was unhappy. Aaron gave official notice in early 2017, and Richard responded with a public statement calling the departure unexpected and not his decision, insisting the shop would keep running without missing a step. Aaron's final episode aired that March, and although the show continued for a few more seasons, it never recovered its earlier momentum before Discovery quietly canceled it in 2020. Aaron opened ArcLight Fabrication in Dallas later in 2017, and while the absence of cameras and artificial deadlines felt like freedom on paper, running an actual business nearly broke him in the first few months. Payroll, vendor contracts, and cash flow problems replaced the simple act of building cars, and he later admitted that learning to run a company was harder than anything television had thrown at him. His goal was to build a complete parts ecosystem around F-100 trucks, letting even inexperienced customers order everything needed for a full build from one source. Kaufman eventually came back with a new pitch built around Aaron's own creative vision rather than network shortcuts, which led to Shifting Gears in 2018, a show where Aaron picked the projects and controlled the pace himself, starting with a brutal off-road build for King of the Hammers. Ratings never matched his old show, but after 2 seasons he walked away feeling he'd proven something more valuable, that he could make television on his own terms while running a business that actually reflected who he was. And these days, Aaron and Richard occupy an in-between space, neither close friends nor enemies, having settled into something Aaron once described simply as a lack of rapport. Richard has said the shop felt calmer and easier once Aaron left, comments that stung some fans, but also revealed how differently the two men were wired, with Richard energized by chaos and Aaron worn down by it. Aaron rarely criticizes Richard publicly, choosing instead to frame their split as two people who needed each other for a while and then stopped sharing the same goals. He now splits his time between ArcLight and racing, having returned to Pikes Peak in 2022 behind the wheel of a 1949 Ford F1 he calls Old Smoky, working with partners like MagnaFlow and taking on only the long-term creative builds that interest him, with no network deadline standing over his shoulder.